So class, we're on lesson 12-3, which is comparing decimals. Now, just a reminder before we get started, when we compare decimals, remember we have our place values we talk about. So we have our, I'll just put a number here, we have our ones, we have in red the tenths, which is right after the decimal, and then we have our hundredths. And remember, it's called tenths because we need 10 of these guys to equal one whole, and it's called hundredths because we need 100 of these guys to equal one whole. Remember, you can think of it as dimes. You need 10 dimes to make $1. And for the hundredths, you could think of it as pennies. You need 100 pennies to equal $1. So remember, when we are comparing, we need to line up the decimals. So always, always, always line up the decimals. And then you start on that largest place value. You start on the number that's closest to the left-hand side. So you always start on the left. And you're going to check, is that number bigger? Is one bigger than the other? If they're the same, well then, you just go to the next place value. Or either one of those bigger? Yeah. 3 is bigger than 2. So what that means is that this one right here is larger. You could also think of it. Would you rather have 2 dimes or would you rather have 3 dimes? Would you rather have 20 cents or 30 cents? So remember, number one rule, always line up those decimals. Okay, now for number 1. Sai says 20 hundredths is greater than 2 tenths because 20 is greater than 2. Do you agree? Well, remember what's our first rule? Line up those decimals. So there's 20 hundredths and there's 2 tenths. So let's check. They're the same, so we go to the next place value. They're the same, so we go to the next place value. And remember, if there's nothing there, that nothing is a 0. They're the same. So no, we don't agree. Neither one is bigger. So we're going to put no for our answer, and then we need that explanation. So we're going to put, when I draw 20 hundredths, and this is just another way to explain it, so we'll look at it in a moment. When I draw 20 hundredths and 2 tenths on hundredths grids, what happens? Well, the same amount is shaded. And then what does that tell me? Well, it tells me 20 hundredths is equal to 2 tenths. Now what that's saying is it's saying if we had what? Well, it's saying if we had 2 tenths and 20 hundredths, remember that's going to be shading in what? Well, these are my hundredths. And it's saying if we broke this up into 100 pieces, which I'm not going to do, but that'd be 2 of these rows, that's 20 hundredths. And then if we had what? If we had 2 tenths, that's 2 bars. That's a really sloppy bar. That's 2 tenths. They're the same amount that'd be shaded. Okay, number 2 through 5. Write greater than, less than, or equal to in each of these blanks. Use place value blocks or grids as needed to compare. Well, remember our number 1 rule? Before we even use those place value blocks, we're going to line up the decimals to see if that helps. So let's check. Start on the left. They're the same. Next one over. One's bigger. The 7 is bigger than 5 tenths. So that's going to be a greater than symbol. Again, let's head over here to number 3. Again, we always line up those decimals. And then we start on the left-hand side, the biggest place value. They're the same, so we go next door. 4 is greater than 1, so 4 dimes is greater than 1 dimes. So we're going to put a greater than sign. Now for number 4. Again, always line out those decimals. Wow, we don't even need to go past the decimal because $6 is smaller than $7. So $6 is less than $7. And our last one, we line up those decimals. Again, start on the left-hand side, that largest place value. They're the same, so we go to the next place value. 1/10 is the same as 1/10, so we go next door. There's no number in that place value. So remember, we can always put a 0 there. if there's no number in the place value, and they're the same. So that means these are equal to. So it seems pretty easy. So now let's head to this next portion. Number 6, write greater than, less than, or equal to. Use place value blocks, grids, or number lines to help as needed. So what is larger, 1/100th or 1/10th? Well, let's always put our decimals in a straight line, and now we can check. They're the same, so we go next door. 1 is bigger than 0, so 1/10th is greater than 1/100th. 1/100th is less than 1/10th. So here, let's try not using the place value blocks this time. Well, look, I have these extra 2 shaded in because they're missing right here. So that means 31/100ths is bigger than 29/100ths. So if those place value blocks are already there, sometimes this might be easier just to look at them. Well, look, this group right here is bigger than this group, so that means it's going to be greater than. So now let's head to number 9. Oh, there's no place value blocks. Luckily, we remember that we always line up those decimals. So let's check. They're the same, so we go next door. They're the same, so we go next door. There's no number, so remember, we always add a 0 if there's no number, and they're the same. So what does it tell us? Well, it tells us 1/10th is equal to 10/100ths. This next one, lined up with money. Always line up those decimals, and now remember, we always start on the left, the biggest place value. $2 is the same as $2, so now we go to the next place value. 9 dimes is bigger than 5 dimes, so this is going to be a greater than. 9 is bigger than 5. 298 is bigger than 256. Again, always line up those decimals, then always start on the left because that's your largest place value. 7 is the same as 7, so we go to the next place value. 1 is bigger than 0, so that means it's greater than. 7 1/100ths is less, oops, I said greater than, it's less than, even though I drew the less than sign. 7 1/100ths is less than 7 1/10ths. Again, line up those decimals. Start on the left-hand side because that's your largest place value. 0 is the same as 0, so we go to the next place value. 7 is bigger than 0, so that means it's going to be eating that 7. So 8/100ths is less than 7/10ths. Next one, again, always line up those decimals and then start on the left because that's your largest place value. They're the same, so we go to the next place value. They're the same, so we go to the next place value. It's missing that number in the hundredths place value somewhere. We always add a 0, and then we check. Is 0 bigger than 0? It's not. They're the same. So 3 40/100ths is the same as 3 4/10ths. Now, again, always line up those decimals, and then we can compare. 2 is the same as 2, so we go to the next place value. 1 is bigger than 0, so that means what? It means that this is greater than. $21.50 is greater than $20.99. So our next one, write a decimal to make the comparison true. So instead of them giving us the blank for this, we have to come up with a number that's less than this number. So remember, we're always going to put a decimal line straight up, and so we need a number that's smaller than 2. Or we could have a number that's 2 and smaller than 3. I'm just going to do a 1 here. And then we could put any number we want right here. We could even leave it blank. I'm just going to put a 9. Doesn't matter because remember, you compare that biggest place value. Here, what do we have? Well, we always line up those decimals, and since it needs to be equal, it has to be the exact same thing. So we could put this, or we could just take the 0 off. Okay, always line up those decimals, and we need a number that's bigger. So we can have a number that's bigger than 4, or we could have 4 right here, and pick a number that's bigger than 4 in this one. So let's do 9. And now we could put any number here, because 9 is bigger than 4. So you could have had 5 in the hundreds, or in the ones place value, or you could have had a 4. But if you had a 3 or less, it would be incorrect. Okay, here we need this number to be bigger. So we can put any number that's smaller than it. We could do 11, we could do 13, and then make this number less than 2. Any number is okay. So let's just do that one, 13 19/100ths. Over here, we need a number that's less than, so a number that's smaller. So again, a number that's smaller than 5, any number could be 2, could be 3. So let's just do 3. And then since we compare the biggest place values, those ones, it actually doesn't matter what number we put in for the tens place. And over here, 6.21 is equal to what? Well, we can just put the exact same number down. When you get to 5th grade, you're going to talk about the thousands place, so you could just put a 0 here. Maybe some of you said, hey, we can do that. Because remember, we can always add them at the end if it's a decimal. So now let's head to our next page, the word problems. Number 21. Maria timed how long it took her Venus flytrap to close. The first time it took 4,300 seconds to close. Now, if you don't know what a Venus flytrap is, it's this really cool plant that actually eats bugs. So yeah, the bugs land on its petals, it closes, and then it has, I guess the closest thing to relate it to is like stomach acid that we have that dissolves the bug, and then it gets the nutrients from it. Now, the second time it took 0.6 of a second to close, which was a faster time. Draw place value blocks to show your comparison. Well, remember our first thing, even though it tells us to use place value blocks, we've just been practicing by lining those decimals up. So let's do that first just to check. So which one's faster? Well, that's the same. So now we go to the next place value. That's the same. So what does that tell us? 43 hundredths, or 43 hundredths is less than 0.6. And if it's less than, that means that this is the faster time because it's not taking as long. So what do we put here? Oops, I zoomed out too much. The faster time was 43 hundredths. Now remember, we haven't finished it because it's telling us to do what? It wants us to draw those place value blocks. So let's look. So this is my tenths, 2 tenths, 3 tenths, 4 tenths, and then 1, 2, 3. So that's 43 hundredths. And then it wants us to compare to 6 tenths, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now remember, this one is kind of tricky because you might think, oh, the bigger number is bigger, which, yes, it is, but it doesn't mean it's the faster one. So now let's head to number 22. Fishing lures have different weights. Which lure weighs more? So we have 63 hundredths and 5 tenths of an ounce. So like always, we line up those decimals. Remember, those decimals need to be in a straight line right there so that we can compare the same place values. They're the same, so we go next door. 6 is bigger than 5, so 63 hundredths is greater than 5 tenths. So which one weighs more? Well, the yellow minnow weighs more. Off to 23 now. Ellen wants to give about, so maybe this word is key, because remember, it's not exact. 125 toys to each of 7 charities. In 1 week, she collects 387 toys. Next week, she collects 515 toys. Has Ellen reached her goal? Explain. Well, let's check. Well, that word about means what? Well, it means, remember, it doesn't have to be exact. So we can round these if we would like. So let's check. 387. Well, 387, and we're going to use these little things. Those little things means approximate or about. So that's about 390. And then we have this right here, 515. What's that about? We want an easier number. That's about 520. Now, what we could do if we wanted, we could also say this was about 400, because those are even easier numbers to work with. And this is about 500. So we could do either one of those for about. So let's check. Well, let's use this one because honestly, 400 and 500, that's much easier to work with. So that's going to be about 900 toys. So she got about 900 toys. Now our tricky part is what? Well, we have to see how many toys she has to give to these charities. Remember, she wants to give this much to each. So let's check that out. We have 125 times 7. So again, we could round this so it's a little easier, but I think we can do this math. So let's check. 5 times 7 is 35. Regroup that 3. 7 times 2 is 14. Plus 3 is 17. Regroup. 7 times 1 is 7. Plus 1 is 8. So look at that. She only needed 875, and she got about 900 toys. So her answer is yes, she's collected enough. Now, here's the tricky part. Since it said about, it's good. But remember, since we were estimating, if we are not estimating, but since we're using about, we're picking those friendly numbers, it may not be exact. So she may be a little above it, she may be a little short, but because it says about, it didn't have to be the exact answer. Now, for number 24, it says Tori has 2 different size water bottles. In the larger bottle, she has 81/100 liter of a bottle. In the smaller bottle, she has 1 1/10 of a liter of water. Can you tell whether one bottle has more water? Explain. So, there's this large water bottle. So I'm just going to draw a picture to help me visualize it. There's this large water bottle, and it's filled with water. So we're going to label it large, and it has 81/100. And then we have this smaller bottle, which is weird. And why is it weird? Well, because in that smaller water bottle, it has what? It actually has more water, because it has 1 1/10. So can we tell which one has more water? Yeah, we can. And why is that? Well, it's even though the bottles are different sizes, we're comparing the number of liters. We're comparing how much water they have. We're not comparing the sizes. So let's put this in our sentence for explanation. Even though the bottles are different sizes, we are comparing the number of liters. Now, notice our question doesn't say which one is bigger. It's just saying, can we tell whether? But we're just going to add that part to it, that the smaller bottle has more water. Now off to 25. We only have 2 more. Stanley found the weights of 2 minerals, which were quartz and granite. The quartz weighed 3 76/100 of an ounce, and the garnet weighed 3 68/100 of an ounce. Explain how Stanley can use a model to find which mineral weighed more. Now, it doesn't say draw a model, it says explain how. So this one, honestly, kind of more than what we've been practicing. So it's going to say, how do we use that model? So Stanley can use a number line. That's one way. So let's just talk about that. Remember, our models don't always have to be those place value blocks. So we can use a place value line to compare the 2 weights. He can draw a number line. That shows hundredths. Between 3 60/100 and 3 80/100. Then plot the points. Now what do we do next with this? 3 76/100 is farther. Whoa, that was some bad writing there. So sorry about that poor writing, guys. It's farther to the right on the number line. So what weighs more? So the quartz weighs more. And look at that bad penmanship on the iPad. Now, for our last one, explain how Stanley can use place value to find which window weighs more. So Stanley can compare each digit of the decimals starting from the left. The ones place of each weight is 3. So what does he do? Well, remember, we compared the tens place. So he should compare the tens place. And the weight for garnet has a 6. So what does that tell us? 6 is less than 7. So the garnet weighs less. All right, that's it, guys. You now can compare decimals. Remember, the most important thing when comparing decimals is you need to do what? You need to line up the decimals. So your place values are all on the same line.